Okay, I think we're going to start, and welcome to our webinar. Again, we just wanted to come and talk to you guys because we've gotten so many questions, and we thought it best to kind of address everybody at once. And I want to kind of start with a couple of things, but first I want to introduce you to Karen Moss on our team. I think you know me, I own Innovative Outsourcing, and we are a staffing and recruiting firm that hire people part-time and full-time, as well as do HR consulting. To that end, the lead person in HR on our team is Karen Moss, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Karen.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for being with us. We have, as Cindy has said, we've had so many questions that have come in from various clients about how to handle all of these issues regarding vaccines and masks and remote work. And I've been part of the IO team for quite a few years. My background is in HR, both on the corporate side and consulting. And I do a lot of work now with small businesses and really love that. So we're so happy that you could be with us this morning, and we're going to cover most of the frequently asked questions, but I would like to say that we're giving our advice from an HR perspective, obviously. Cindy and I have been in HR for many years, and we see things, we look at data, obviously from an HR perspective. We understand the regulations and the laws, but we are not attorneys, nor do we intend to come across as providing legal advice. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that. It's really just based on the data that we've looked at and our own experience in talking to clients that we have.
Yeah. So again, so happy to have you here. We have just a ton of information. So we collected a bunch of questions that you guys sent in advance, and we're really excited about that because they were great questions. So we're going to just kind of use those, and you're going to be kind of eavesdropping a little bit on what we're going to call a conversation between Karen and I, because we've had these conversations off and on, and we thought, let's just record that, because a lot of it is not, this is when you normally come to us and ask us HR questions, we know the right answer, right? This one is such an unproven place, and there has been no litigation to date on this that has gone all the way through the court system. So to some extent, these are just guesses on all of our parts about what this is going to look like. We know what the EEOC says, we know what OSHA says, but we really have no idea how the courts, even the Supreme Court, will probably rule on some of this stuff in the future. So we don't know. So again, this will just be a nice casual conversation between Karen and I, and you'll just be able to eavesdrop on it. So we may disagree on some things, or we may have some different information or different thoughts. And so we just want you to participate. So we're excited to have you here. So we wanted to give you some overarching thoughts about just what's going on to preface our questions that we're going to be asking today. So just as an FYI, the Georgia unemployment rate is at a pre-pandemic low. It's 4.3%. And for those of us that are in staffing and recruiting, what that means is that there are hardly any candidates. If you want to get a good candidate for most positions right now, you have to go and actually find them in their companies that they currently work in. Nobody really is looking for a position right now in the professional world. I know we have a lot of unemployment in, say, the restaurant world and those more basic level jobs, but in the jobs that we hire for, which is that professional services world, their unemployment is very low. What that means to you is that it's a candidate market. It means that people are getting 3 offers at a time. When we give them a job offer, they likely have 2 others. It means that we have to give them a reason to want to work for your company instead of somebody else's company. It's not anymore that they're just lucky to get a job offer. It's that they're evaluating your job offer or staying with you as an employer against everybody else that they could be going to. So they're very hard to keep and hard to find. And the reason why, there's a Prudential study that just came out a few days ago that said 50% of employees say that if they're forced to come back to work 5 days a week in the professional job, that they were going to look for a new job. That's 1 in 2. That's probably not your employees. It's probably, all your competitors' employees, but it's 1 in 2. So that same study said that 25% of all employees say that they are already looking for a new job. 25%, and that has nothing to do with requiring them to come back. And Karen even said that SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resources Management, Karen, what did they say? It was 50%?
They were saying when they did this survey that in 2021, that about 50% of employees plan to look for other work this year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just a huge number. It
Yeah, we
really,
have never heard that number before in human resources. So all the things that we're going to say about masks and vaccines and harassment and discrimination and the things that we're about to talk about, we need to look through it with that lens, because we are here to help you as HR, right? We are not your legal team, like Karen said. But as we look at the importance of the human capital on your staff, right? I mean, they're such an asset for you. We need to figure out, how do we protect that asset? How do we make sure that they want to stay with you? Because we know that if you lose somebody, it's going to be really hard and really expensive to find somebody new. So all of what we're going to talk about is couched a little bit in that, as well as the laws that we now know about. So anyway, so that is, and then one more statistic that I wanted to give you before our questions is that Georgia, the full vaccination right now is 31%, which means 69% of your staff possibly, or close to that, has no vaccine. So as we're making decisions on what we do, what we mandate, what we require, all of those things, it's good to keep that in mind. We're one of the lowest states in participation in the country. So 31%, 36% have one shot, but as of yesterday, 31% had their full shots. So again, I think if we listen to the media, it feels like almost everybody has a shot. And so we want to make our decisions in our company based on the fact of facts. And that is the fact. So, okay. So question number one, we're going to talk about masks first. And Karen, what should we do about masks? What should we require? When are they necessary? Why don't you jump in with that one, and then I'll jump in after you.
Yeah, so as far as masks go, I think we all know that the CDC guidelines indicate that if someone's been fully vaccinated, they don't have to wear a mask. They don't have to be socially distanced, either inside or outside. But then, as Cindy mentioned, when you look at the statistics of people who are not vaccinated, there are no guidelines other than it's really up to the individual employer. Unless, let's say, you're in healthcare, it's still required if you're in a healthcare facility. Also public transportation, like if you're flying, if you're taking transportation like a bus. But other than that, it's really up to you, the private employer, to decide if you want employees to wear a mask or not wear a mask. And I would say, as far as that goes, that you really have to understand your employees. Do you have a work setting where people have private offices? I mean, if you do, I think there's much less of a risk, to say that everyone has to wear a mask. If you're in a setting where people sit very closely together, typically, then that might be different. If you're in a work setting where, let's say, you have a grocery store and people are customer facing all of the time. So it really depends on your business, whether you're customer facing, really trying to figure out where your employees are at, how they feel about it, because as an employer, what you're trying to do is to balance keeping your employees safe, but at the same time, respecting their privacy and giving them an opportunity to make that personal choice.
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I think we're going to find that as we talk, is that we as people who own companies have never been in a position before where we're trying to balance employee safety to some extent with a virus against people's individual freedoms and their privacy. And we don't really know what we're doing, right? As companies, we've never anticipated this before. So in some ways, you're not going to be making a popular decision either way you go. Right. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, that I don't know that what we tell you today, you are definitely going to be making the most popular decision, because it's so polarized with what people feel about things, probably in your own company, that you're going to make somebody upset with whichever way you go. So you've got to know why you're doing what you're doing, but also with the eye of, we need to make sure that we create a workplace that people want to be at. Right. And you would only know that. So what Karen is saying, I think is so true, is that if you make a mandate and it creates high safety in your opinion, but you lose all your employees, that's a loss, right? So you have to balance that, and knowing that there's a good number of people that feel both sides of the spectrum. So yeah.
And I think,
go
with everything, you have to really err on the side of caution. You have to tread lightly on these things because, whether it's mask or vaccine, the word mandate or require, that's really not being conservative and probably not a good idea, except perhaps if you're in the healthcare industry, like we said, or transportation. So I think you really need to tread lightly, and you need to use empathy. You need to really think about empathizing with your employees. And you're not, like Cindy said, you're not going to please everyone. It's never possible to do that. We all know that. But you kind of have to strike a happy medium.
So I guess the question on masks that we keep getting asked a lot is, can we require that they be worn? Let's say we're not in healthcare, we're not in travel. Can we require that? If I own a CPA firm, can I require it of everybody or just of non-vaccinated people? Can
Absolutely,
I do that?
you can do that. Yes, you have every right to do that if you're a private employer.
Yeah. So again, some of these things you can do. It's just we're trying to make you evaluate what should you do, right? Because not everything we can do we do, because we are trying to be good employers, right? And we're trying to be empathetic. So again, you do have the ability to tell everybody to wear a mask or just the unvaccinated people to wear a mask. You can do that. The EEOC has said that that's fine. Also, Karen, unless something's changed in the last 24 hours, I believe that the CDC came out and said that you don't have to wear a mask indoors if you're vaccinated. But OSHA, which is the governing body on work, has not changed their mandate that everybody should wear a mask if they're in close proximity. Is that still the case?
It's ambiguous, to be honest with you. It's not as clear cut as what you're describing.
Yeah.
And they're taking the position right now that they support the CDC guidelines. So OSHA is supposed to come out any day now with clearer guidance. And so we're waiting to see what they have to say.
Yeah.
Because OSHA's position is, as an employer, you want to provide a safe workplace. Well, what does that really mean? Hazard-free, safe workplace.
Right. Again, facing something we've never faced before. Okay, let's turn to vaccines, because that seems to be something that everybody is, based on the questions that I've gotten, phone calls in the last few days, it seems to be the hot, heavy thing that people are talking about. So the prevalent question is, one, can we ask the employee, can we as the employer ask the employee if she's received or he has received the COVID vaccine? Can we ask?
Yes, we can ask the question. We absolutely can. But the danger in doing that, you can do that. But the danger is if you go beyond that.
Yep.
If you start, or even if the employee volunteers additional information, then they're revealing medical information about themselves. And so that's the danger, really, of once you go down that road. Yes, you can ask whether or not someone's been vaccinated, but the danger is that people start giving you more information, or worse, you start asking more information about someone's possible medical condition or disability.
Yeah, absolutely. People have asked me, well, isn't it because it's funny that people are asking this question, isn't it a HIPAA violation to ask if they're vaccinated? And the answer is no, it is not a HIPAA violation to ask if they're vaccinated. It is only becomes a HIPAA violation, which is that Medical Privacy Act, if you then follow it up with, why aren't you vaccinated? Right? So when you go from, are you vaccinated, not a HIPAA violation, to why didn't you get a vaccine? That becomes, then you have to be really careful with HIPAA laws. because that then says, oh, I have this medical condition and I can't get a vaccine because my doctor told me not to. Or, you know, you also may be wading into waters of, I have a religious objection. So you've got to be really careful when you take that next step of why, because the first step of if you have it doesn't seem to be problematic. The next step does seem to be problematic. So, and remember that most likely in your environment, less than half of the people have a vaccine. So it's not like you're going to ask this of a small number of people. And then one of the things I wanted to talk about, Karen, and you didn't talk about this ahead of time, but if you're going to ask about a vaccine and keep up with that, and are we recommending people document that? So are we recommending people keep it in their personnel files, or how do they do that? Like, let's say they ask they have 30 employees and you're a CPA firm, and they ask everybody if they've had a vaccine. Do they record that? What should they do? What do you think?
There's mixed reviews on that. I mean, you certainly can record the information, but I would say that if you choose to do that, it is medical, it is confidential, and it must be kept separate from their personnel file. So yes, you could do that, but if you did, just like with your I-9, same kind of thing, any kind of medical information must be kept separately from their employee file.
Yeah, and it's good to have that one person in the company, or the HR person, if you have one. If you don't, the designee that has been trained on what they can say and can't say to be making this decision. I would not let all of your supervisors ask the question if they're vaccinated, unless you've done a really good job of training the supervisors in what to do, what to say and not to say, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, it's a slippery slope, because again, if someone hasn't been trained in this, you know, they're going to end up asking questions and getting information that really, you know, goes beyond that privacy that person has. So you want to make sure someone knows what they're doing if they're asking the question and they're accessing this information.
Yeah. And then when they do keep that information, just like you said, Karen, it needs to be in a very separate place in their personnel file, so that anybody that can get, just like any benefit information, right? For those of you that don't know that, benefit information as well as health information should much be kept separately from a personnel file, because a lot of people could have access to the personnel file, but only a very small number of people should have access to their medical information. So this would be considered medical information.
Right.
And then, you know, you've got to think about, if you're going to keep up with this, who has a vaccine and who doesn't, then you're going to have to, if you want to keep that up and that's part of your policy, then you're going to have to deal with who's been booster shotted, you know, 6 to 12 months from now. And, you know, if the Pfizer shot needs 6 months before they get a new one, and the Moderna needs 12 months, and the Johnson & Johnson needs 13 months, are you going to keep up with all of that so that you can let people know, okay, your vaccine's up? I mean, you have to make a decision. I mean, are you ready to accept the responsibility of keeping that information and keeping it up to date? Because once you go down that path and keep that information, I mean, we don't even know what's coming up, right? We don't even know what could come up with the booster shots and everything else. So again, make sure before you make a decision on it that you actually have the people in place and the systems in place and the will to keep that information current.
Current, right.
Yeah, otherwise it'll look like you didn't know what you were doing. So I would be careful about that. And then, Karen, how much can we ask them? Let's say I'm the HR person at a company, or I'm the CEO and I don't have an HR person. How much can I ask them? Why didn't they have one? Like, I know that involves HIPAA violations, but at some point, if I'm going to require or heavily heavily incentivize people into getting a vaccine, at some point, I'm going to need to make an accommodation for them, possibly. Can you talk a little bit about accommodations, what that means, as well as in the vaccine world?
Yeah, so if you're the HR person, or let's say you're the CEO and you're having, you've decided that you're going to mandate or require it, and you have a conversation and someone says, you know, I just really, perhaps I have a medical condition or my religious beliefs, or I simply do not want to do it. I don't believe in it. Right? It could be a number of different reasons. But as far as religion or medical, several accommodations that you might consider would be, could this person have a separate office? Could this person work from home? Could this person be on leave for a while? Could they be in another type of position, where they could work from home or have a private office? So you need to look at all of those different aspects, particularly if someone comes to you and you discuss this and they say, I can't have this because I'm immunocompromised, I'm going through this treatment, and I absolutely cannot do that. And I would say, in those two cases where it's a medical condition that you find out about or religious belief, you absolutely, unless it's an incredible and undue hardship for the company, you need to try and accommodate these folks if you've decided to require the vaccine. It's the right thing to do. It's the right message that you want to send to someone.
Yeah,
Because like we've talked about, do you want to push this employee because they've got a medical condition and you've decided to require the vaccine, push them out the door? Would that be the right thing to do, in addition to actually setting yourself up for a potential lawsuit?
Yeah, and what message does that send to the rest of the employees,
Right.
on how we treat somebody who may have a
disability,
yeah.
right?
So we've got to be really careful with that. And we're going to talk about harassment in just a bit. But okay, so Joe on the webinar has a question, and it's actually our next question. So his question is, can an employer require a vaccination? And the reason he's asking is because as an employer, I'm concerned about potential liability of my employees transmitting the disease to clients. So that goes right into, can we require it? So I'll take that one first, and then Karen, you want to jump in on that one. Yes, the current law says that you can require that, right? And so we're seeing, I did talk to a labor attorney day before yesterday, and he said most of his clients are not requiring it. He doesn't know anybody that is, and he works with large companies and small. In fact, we haven't heard of, there's one Texas hospital that is requiring it, and now they have a class action lawsuit with 117 employees that don't want to get it. So again, you can require it, just like you can make everybody wear masks. It's just a question of how's that going to hold up, and we don't know. Right now, you see the Texas lawsuit that's come up, and I feel like there will be more if that happens. And I understand the concern about the liability of the employees, although we haven't seen lawsuits that I know of, Karen, from a standpoint, or I haven't heard of any where the employer that allows somebody to come to work and somebody gets COVID there is being sued. So I think what we've heard from our professionals is that it's so impossible to trace where you get COVID that if your employee, Joe, walks into the client's office and your employee has COVID and transmits COVID to that person that's in your client office, that client would have to show that their employee didn't go to the grocery store, didn't go out to dinner with anybody. They had been purely, totally by themselves, didn't touch anything, didn't get to anybody, in order for you to have a liability, I would guess, on COVID, because you could get it anywhere from anybody. So, if the only person that they ever talked to was your employee, and that is hard to know. So that's why we haven't seen that too much. And so I see that. Yeah, jump in.
I would add something to that, and that is, interestingly enough, one thing that OSHA did comment on was, for when we have an accident, right, or an illness, something that is a result of it occurred at work, then we have to consider whether or not it's recordable in our OSHA logs. And OSHA said basically that anyone who gets COVID and doesn't have to, that's not recordable right now. If someone has an adverse effect to the vaccine, it's not recordable, and they're saying it's not recordable through May of 2022. So
And
I think
that means that And what does that not recordable mean?
So it means that if someone, let's say that we require someone to get a vaccine and they have an adverse reaction, we don't have to record that, meaning that it was related to, it happened as a result of being at work with perhaps someone that they were exposed to.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, so basically what we're seeing here is that, yes, you could potentially, I did have a client who their employee got COVID. They were a HVAC tech and they went to a business and several of the people there tested positive for COVID, but there was no way to trace it back that those two employees would have gotten it from the employee that was there, because there was no way to separate that from any other, because they'd been in other situations.
Other places they've been, right?
Yeah, that would be a really hard one. So to require employees to do that because you think they might give it to a client and you might be liable. Again, talk to your attorney about that, because I'm not an attorney. And neither is Karen, but what we're hearing is that would be tough to prove that they hadn't seen any other person, in 14 days. So I think but that's a great question. But again, got to think about that, how that impacts. I did have another person ask a question. I'm not on this webinar, but last week in a session that their clients were requiring that anytime their employees came in, that they had a vaccine. So again, you don't have any control over that. So if your client is saying that if your employees go to their place of business that they have to have a vaccine, then that's just something you have to consider. You may have to send your vaccinated population and not your unvaccinated population to that account, and then just switch around the accounts in order to accommodate that. Because again, you have no control over that. So any other thoughts on that?
No, that's good.
Yeah. Again, requiring is allowed for now, but you can get sued for anything, as we saw by the Texas hospital system. Again, my guidance is generally, and again, not legal guidance, but Karen and I've talked about this, maybe the best guidance is to encourage, if you want to encourage, but not require. Because unless you have a business that, is a healthcare firm or something else. And the reason is that we don't, again, those proclamations, like everybody has to be vaccinated here by, July 1st, or you get fired, probably long-term won't be looked at possibly as positive. And you could have a lot of employees that were already possibly thinking about leaving. So you've got to kind of weigh that. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I think, something that Cindy and I have been talking about now for a while is it's being reasonable as an employer. What makes sense for your employees and your business, and being reasonable about things, not being extreme on one end or the other.
Yeah. Can we fire an employee for refusing to get the vaccine?
We can. I mean, you can as an employer. You certainly can do that. I would not advise doing that. I don't think it's a good move, again, based on everything else that we've talked about. But yes, you can.
Yeah. And again, you need to look at the numbers, right? Yeah. And I think you're going to find in most of because looking at the data that we have for the city of Atlanta, as well as the state of Georgia, if that's where your employees are, it's less than half the people are vaccinated. So again, are you willing to lose half your employees? And I was listening to something interesting about encouragement about getting the vaccine, because one of the things a lot of companies are doing is encouraging it. I just heard something about, if we get to 70%, everybody gets a free beer or something, that's being proposed. I thought that was the funniest thing with Anheuser-Busch. Anyway, so, you get a free Krispy Kreme donut. There's so many things that you get free that a lot of people are trying to encourage their people, which again, you can choose to do that or not. There's some of my people, in fact, somebody on this webinar just asked the question, can I be held liable if I require, or if I request somebody get a vaccine and then they have an adverse reaction? Again, there's two schools of thought on that. I've talked to two lawyers and they have two different opinions. One is if there's an adverse reaction and you have required or basically coerced the employees into getting a vaccine, and there is an adverse reaction to them in the future, some attorneys are saying that that could become workers' comp, because, and you could be, your workers' comp piece could be liable for that. And some are saying because we did not know there was anything wrong with it, that it was good faith that you required them to do that. So it's just a matter, and there wouldn't be any liability. So again, we don't know. I mean, there's not been any cases on this. We aren't 3 years down the road. So you have to make the best decision you can make with the knowledge you have, knowing that attorneys differ in their thoughts on what that liability is going to be. Any other thoughts on that, Karen?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Okay, so we have another question that is, can we encourage people? What can we pay people? Can we give them, and there's been some EEOC guidance that came out on that, Karen. Can you give us that?
Yeah, so you absolutely can encourage, and about 75%, when I looked at a survey that a law firm had done recently, about 75% of the employers that were surveyed, are encouraging their employees to get the vaccine. And there are different degrees of encouragement. Some employers are looking at incentives like what Cindy just described. And the EEOC recently came out and said, yes, I mean, you can do incentives. So we know that you can do that. It's, but is the incentive somehow being forced on people? To what degree is that happening? I think a gift card or the beer or donuts or whatever, that's perfectly fine if you want to do that. Again, understanding your employees and what's good for them. I think the simplest thing is directing them toward the best resources to get good information about, should I get a vaccine or not? And I think a lot of that is, there's resources like the CDC where they could get some good information, but also recommending that they also talk to their personal physicians, because it is very much a personal choice. And so any form of encouragement like that is certainly very acceptable.
Yeah, and I think that
It works best for your employees.
Yeah, I mean, always in the past, and I know the past is the past now because of this pandemic, but the answer for an employer has always been, I think, the best course of action is for you to go to your personal physician, and whatever they recommend, that's what we recommend you do. We don't recommend medical things here, right? And so you've got to be careful as an employer to recommend a medical procedure, in my opinion, rather than saying, I think you should go to your doctor, and if you and your doctor think it's the right thing to do, that's what you need to do. So again, it's personal choice, but boy, there's something in me that is having a hard time recommending a medical procedure to my employees, because I don't know their history, I don't know their background, I don't know their other the other things that may be wrong with them, nor do I need to. So the fact that I would tell them to do something, I don't know, I'm not saying you can't, but that there's something about me that I won't do that for my employees. But that doesn't mean that I'm in your same situation. Okay, let's go to what are most employers doing regarding the vaccine? So you said 75% are encouraging.
Correct.
I have not heard of, and Karen, I don't know of any, have you heard of anybody that is saying if you don't get a vaccine by July 1 or something, you're out? I mean, I know we've heard of the Texas hospital system.
Other than healthcare, the small businesses that I've worked with, I've not heard anyone requiring the vaccine.
I know Delta Airlines came out and said that they were requiring it for new hires, of any new hire, that they have a vaccine. But they're a travel company.
They're in the transportation industry.
And
right?
so, there's going to be FAA regulations on that. And right now the FAA is saying you have to wear a mask in many countries that you fly to are requiring a vaccine. So again, that's a little squishy because they are a travel company, but we've seen that in the news, but I don't know of any small businesses personally that are doing that. Although that could be happening. Okay, let's talk a little bit in our next little time, because I think this is the thing that's most important to me, I think, is that bullying, discrimination, and harassment, and what we're seeing in companies, and what I have a feeling are going to be the bigger lawsuits, rather than whether or not I wear a mask lawsuit. I think we're going to start seeing harassment. So, Karen, what do you think about that? And what's our responsibility as employers?
Again, I think to be reasonable. And so if you think about it, if you're going to require a vaccine, let's say, when we look at the statistics, Cindy and I were talking about this just the other day. When you look at the statistics of who's been vaccinated and who hasn't, and we're talking about if you looked at it by race, you would see that probably over 60% of people that have been vaccinated are Caucasian, and a very small percentage of people who are Asian, who are Black or Hispanic, very small percentage.
Was an Asian high like Caucasian? I can't remember. I think Asian was high.
It was not as high as Caucasian, but the lowest percentages were Black and Hispanic. And so that those are also the lowest percentages, if you think about it, of people that that the highest of people that had COVID. So it's kind of interesting what's happened. But if you think about it, if you're requiring vaccines, let's say in the workplace, think about how you might come across and how you might actually be discriminating, not even thinking about it, you know, for anyone who is Black or Hispanic. I mean, so that's an issue, right? And then just the idea of, just like we don't condone employees coming in and talking about religion, politics. It's the same thing with talking about vaccines or masks in the workplace. It's really inappropriate to get into conversations with people. Oh, I saw that you weren't wearing a mask. Why aren't you wearing a mask? Or, you know, hey, did you get a vaccine? What did you think? It's really, even though you may have concern for people, it's really inappropriate to get into those conversations, because it suddenly becomes a situation where someone perhaps feels bullied or that they're being harassed. You know, so you're really creating a hostile work environment. And most of our businesses have policies against harassment. So maybe we're not thinking about it, but we need to train our employees and educate people that it's just not appropriate. It's kind of like, you know, if you found out that someone had cancer and was going through chemo, would you be asking them about it? So it's just not appropriate to have those conversations in the workplace. It's a very hot topic. It's very dividing for people. It's just like talking about politics, and it doesn't bode well. It causes a lot of harm and conflict.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to see that going forward, because there's so much, like she said, there's so much passion on either side of this debate, just kind of like on every other debate right now. But we want to create our workplaces to not be places of debate, right? I mean, not for these things, because what people want is they want to feel like they belong at their workplace. If you've read this book, I'm doing another webinar on this later, but if you've read this book called It's the Manager, it talks about the number one reason people want to work at your workplace and will stay there is because they feel engaged and accepted, right? So if they are coming to work and they have to wear a mask and their vaccinated friends don't, and the vaccinated people are always saying, well, why don't you get a vaccine? You should get a vaccine because you're making harm for me or whatever. Or the other way around, if your employee comes to work and they've been vaccinated and they're like, why on earth did you get a vaccine? Did you know this could happen and this could happen, right? I mean, if that happens, then again, that number one reason why people stay at a company is that security, knowing that I'm loved and accepted and that it's a good environment, that we're killing, right? So again, we need to, I'm recommending to the clients that I speak with is to have some, when they bring their employees back onto campus, to be having these proactive conversations about, we're not going to ask people if they got a vaccine. We're not going to ask people, you know, why they're wearing a mask, even if they got a vaccine. vaccine? We're not going to ask these questions because we want to create an environment where people want to be at. And we're learning that all of these are so polarized that we're creating just a negative work environment. And then we'll just jump in really quickly because we only have about 5 minutes left. But again, well, one more thought on that. Somebody asked the question of, well, it's kind of like salaries. Like we tell people not to talk about their salaries and they do it anyway. So why would we tell them not to talk about vaccines and they do it anyway? Well, again, we have policies in human resources so that we come out as a company and say, we don't believe in harassment, right? And this is harassment. So that if some employee does that, even if we've trained them, we've put it in our manual about, we don't want to talk about this stuff. We don't want to harass people about vaccines or masks or whatever. And then they go ahead and do it. We have a better position because we have trained our employees. And if that rogue employee goes and does that, we've at least told our employees not to do that. So that's the right thing to do, even if we know our employees will probably talk about vaccines anyway, right? We don't not train because we think somebody's going to go ahead and do it. We train anyway. So anyway, I had a question on that the other day. But then I'm going to roll into working on site versus remote work, because remember that statistic I told you guys earlier, 50% of people said that if they were required to go from working at home full time to working on site 5 days a week right away, that they would quit and go find another job. So as you're making decisions about either working on site, a hybrid approach, or offsite, I wanted to give you a couple of stats, and you guys can call us about it and we can talk about it later. 12% of people that worked 1 to 2 days a week at home pre-pandemic said they were more productive. So 12% more production if they work 1 to 2 days a week from home, and that was pre-pandemic. 40% less engaged if they work 5 days a week from home. So again, the sweet spot before the pandemic was always 1 or 2 days a week from home. It actually makes your employees way more productive for the employees that have the kind of jobs that you can do that. But working 5 days a week does keep them very less engaged, right? So know that as you're bringing people back. So Karen, tell me any thoughts you have on that bringing people back thing.
Yeah, I think that, that's probably from the Gallup poll that you got that data. And so the sweet spot seems to be having people come back perhaps 2 or 3 days a week. I think the main thing and the challenge for having people working remotely, and we're hearing this a lot, is, that sense of being connected, building the culture that you built perhaps and trying to maintain that culture. And not that it can't be done when everyone's working remotely, but boy, it's quite a challenge. And so I think that's something that we have to keep in mind is, how do we really stay connected to people? And I think you're able to do that if you are able to meet everyone. Maybe it's once or twice a week, maybe it's once or twice a month, what have you. But I think there has to be that sense of connection with people that you only get face to face, and things that happen naturally are when people are together as opposed to on Zoom calls.
And just that general rule of thumb that I like in leadership anyway, that I think I'd like to share about this, is that we want to pull and not a push, right? We want our employees to go, maybe we go back to 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and they feel it's so fun to be back because they get to be back with their friends and we're having lunches, and, they forgot maybe that it's maybe not as bad to take off your pajamas and drive to work. And maybe we try 1 to 2 days a week and they go, oh my gosh, I like that so much, I think I'll come Thursday too, right? That's a pull. It means that we're creating an opportunity that they're going to go like, I'm going to opt into working more at work because it was so fun, rather than you going ahead and saying 5 days a week right away. And that's a push, meaning I feel like that's a personal affront to what I want to do. I don't feel safe. I'm not going in, right? And I'm going to go find a new job because they made me do it, right? And so there's 2 ways of looking at leadership. And if we choose to do the pull approach, which creating an environment where they want to be in, and then allowing them to do it naturally, rather than the push environment like July 1st, we're all on board, whether you like it or not, because we don't care, right? I mean, that is probably not your best thing, especially because of the numbers that came out from those surveys about people are looking for a different workplace. So again, we're going to have to cut it off there. I know there are several of you that had questions that I didn't get to. If you want to call us or contact us, Karen and I will have all of our numbers ready. We always do free calls, free 30-minute calls on HR, just because we want to help you guys. We also have put together policies and those kind of things, and come and talk to employee groups and that kind of thing, and helped you with this, because we want to help you. We not only do search and recruit, but we also do that HR consulting and HR outsourcing, because we really want to come alongside you guys and help you, because we know that most of our clients don't have HR teams, and we want to help you through it because this is challenging. So Karen, any last minute thoughts?
No, I think what you said makes a lot of sense, and we're here to do that. And it's been a tough time, but you know what? I feel good about all the companies we've been able to help, and look forward to working with other companies as well.
Yeah. So with that, we'll let you go. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to call us. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.